Welcome back to Discovering Dataflex. We are in the midst of working with the Argus project, which is a system that will keep track on all our resources in the business. And if we look at what the system does now and where we're going, we have this resource list with a resource zoom view where we can put some information in. And the next thing we need to do is to make sure that when we edit and we go in to upload a file, we would like this to work because this doesn't work yet. So when we add a file, we would like to send it into a folder in the data uploads library. And it is containing an ID. So we would like to, we're actually renaming the files with the ID numbers from the resource ID or the attribute ID where we upload them. So if, regardless of what name we have, we store the name in the database and we just save the file as a number. But we would like to have some folder structure here. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a folder that contains 1,000 files at maximum. So when the folder is at 0, it will contain all the IDs from 1 to 999. And when you get to file number 1,000, it will create a new folder and start putting files in there instead, because otherwise you run into the risk of having a file structure where it's too many files and it just takes a ton of time going into that folder. And when we get to 1 million files, we might think about reorganizing the structure, but since everything is numbered, we can easily do that later. And before we do the actual implementation, we're going to need a function that can return the folder name based on an integer. And we are going to try the df unit to run some unit tests on here. And if we go into GitHub and type df unit, we do have some Dataflex df unit here. And if you want to do unit testing, it seems like this is the framework that most of the Dataflex developers are moving towards using. So instead of inventing my own again, or using the one I've created in a previous video, I want to try to use this framework for this project. In order to do that, I have downloaded it to my folder and gone into Tools, Maintain Libraries, and added the df unit as a workspace. And I've actually created a separate unit test project where I actually used the library. So I'm not using it in the other projects. So now I have this unit test project, and we can have a look at what it does. This is kind of a default setup. So we run it, and it says that everything is okay. And it has 3 sample tests here. So I want to know what asserts we can make. So let's go to definition, and here we have assert Boolean condition. We have assert false, assert equal. We can probably go to the code. And then we can see all the different asserts we can make. So these are the assert methods that we want to use, and we want to use it in unit test. And now to the files we want to test. And I would like to add a new package that we're going to test. New, just going to call it class, but it's just an empty file, other empty file for now. And we're going to call it global functions. We might want to change this later to be part of a class or something, or a library of some sort. But now we're starting simple. Okay. TXT, no. Dataflake source file. Okay. So we just want something to test on. Just going to copy the description of what we want. We want a function that takes any 1000 and creates a folder to store the file in. So if it's 3472, it's going to create a folder 3 and then store the file in there as a number. So it's going to return 3. And function. I to multi-level file structure, ID to multi-level file structure. And it takes the ID and returns the string, which is a number, the name of the folder. I also want to create, let's see, a folder in here, a unit test, and in here I want to create a new file, test file handler.pkg. And in our unit tests, instead of these ones, I just want to use this unit test test file handler and go to definition. Here we go. So here we can just include, so use the global functions, and then we can run a test on it. And the unit test expects us to do, yeah, we can actually use, there are some multi-level things we can play with here. So if we create an object, file handler functions is a test fixture. So now we're grouping the tests into this file handler functions test. So we can actually test multiple different things and have multiple tests inside of each of those things. And this one has a procedure setup. It gets called if you want to set up something, and you probably need a procedure teardown as well. And that's because sometimes when you run unit tests, you need to put some data in some tables or set some properties in some classes. And you do that in the setup, and then you run your tests. And then in the teardown, you might want to delete the records you added or something else to prepare for the next test, or don't just fill the database with data because you did some tests. Because sometimes you want to run, when you want to run the test again, you already have the data, so it will complain that the duplicate record or something. So that's why you want to tear down and remove things. But now we're actually not going to use these, so that they're just there to show that you can use them. And now we actually want to add another test fixture, because you can nest these. This is the int to folder structure. Is a C test fixture. Start with published equals true. Procedure error on 0. We would like to send assert and then call this global function that we now have commented out, just to make sure that everything works. And we want to call that with a 0. And we want to check that that returns blank, because this is not allowed. And now if we compile this, we're going to get an error, because this one is not defined. So in some cases, when you work with JavaScript, for instance, you want to make the first check if the procedure or function exists. But in Dataflix, you basically just know that it's there if you can compile. So now we are going to try our first assertion, and that's to check if we get blank back, if it's 0. So we compile and we can run this. And if we run it, we get all of these error messages, but it says it's failed, no message. Should have returned true, but was false. So this one did not return anything. So I suppose it was null or something. What we want to do here in the unit test is we go into the app source, Argus, programs, and we can actually run the unit test exe from here. We don't get all the error messages, so it's a lot cleaner. So we can run the test multiple times. Now let's see what we did wrong here. Oh, this one did not return anything. So how can we, with minimal effort, make sure that this returns an empty string? We do function return an empty string. And now we recompile. Okay, now it works. So it returns blank when we enter 0. That's great. Now we want to make the next test. Publish this test as well. And this one, procedure, we want to test the output on 3. So if we send a 3, what would we like to get? And here we do send. Let me just copy this one. And we send 3. Then we actually want a string with a 0 in it, because this one is below 1000, so we would like to add that to the folder 0. Now let's compile this again and see if we actually get the value of the folder. Now it fails again. So we can see that one test was working and one test was failing. So we can see error on 0, that was okay, but output on 3 failed. So now we need to make sure that it returns 0 if the value is 3. So if IID equals 3, then function return 0. Run the unit test again, and we're good to go. It works. And what we want to test now is, of course, we want to make a copy of this one, and we want to check for inputs like 2043. And this should return a 2. And run the unit test. Now it fails. These two are okay, but this one fails. Okay. So now we need to fix this somehow. And actually, we would like this to not only return 0, we actually would like this one to return 0/3, because that's the full name. And we can modify this one to say assert s for string are equal, and then call this one, and then send testing output on 3. Now we can see that this one failed because we wanted this to return 0/3. Yeah, that's right. So now that one's okay, but this one is failing. And we actually want to do the same here. So when we assert, we want to assert this one should return 2 and 2043, 2043, and 2043. Yeah, we could probably add a test on 0 as input. Now, how are we going about to fix this? We would like to make sure that the value which is returned goes into an integer I folder, and we might need a number I float, n float, and we want to set if ID is 0, then we just want to return an empty string. But if it's not, we want to move floor of n float to floor of IID by 1000 to I folder. And then we want to return string I folder plus string IID. This is probably more like it. And we don't have the floor method. So we probably need to create a function floor as well, which takes a number and float. This is also a global and should return an integer. So we might want to make a test for this one as well. So we're going to create a new test file. And let's do that. And our app source unit test. We copy this one and test math functions. Just so we have some different tests. We want to add this one here. Use unit test test math functions. And then we want to open the test math functions as well. Let's call this math functions floor on integer. And we don't want to use these tests. If we send in floor, let's say 4, we're going to get 4 back. We can actually expected for to return 4. So now assert 4 did not return 4. Should have been true, false. Yeah, okay. So now we actually want to return the n float because that seemed to work. Yeah, so now math functions floor on integer is okay. So now we want to have a second procedure, which we call floor on float, where we set 3.123 and should expect 3 out. 1, 2, 3 to return 3. Let's see if that works. Yeah, we can actually try end object and object floor on low float is a C test fixture. See how that works. We're just testing some things here about the unit system. So here we can see that low float is actually okay. Because it's returning an integer and it seems to be fine. What we actually want to do here, we want to do false. Don't want this test to disturb us. Yeah, now we can see. Now we only use those two tests on the floor structure. Here math functions, this is actually the same, but we can add multiple structures. So I would actually go in here to the math functions and remove this one and change this procedure like that instead. So we have all of these under math functions test. So now it actually works. That's not good, because that's doesn't show us that the test is failing. So we need to figure out how to fail this test. But I assume that if it's working, it's already fine, because it's returning an integer. So it's turning, the integer is basically the floor function. But we could move round and float. No. Yeah, and float to iret, because we want to return the iret, and then iret. So this should also work, I suppose. Yeah, that works as well. So now we would like to run a corresponding test, but this time on a high float. Let's call it 823, and this one should also return 3 then. And let's see how that goes. That fails, because the round function doesn't return 3, it returns 4. So that's why we need to go into the math function and make that an integer instead, and that would work. So I'm not sure if we need the floor function here, but let's play with it. And now, since we're doing integer, we should see that that test worked. Okay, fine. Now we go back into our global functions. No, our math function, we can close that one. So now we set this to true, as we want to test this one again. And now we can use our floor function to move this ID to ifloor. And now this one is also okay. So now we just want to make sure by adding another test, the 2800. And it should return the 2, or so there we go, 2800. Run this one, and it seems to be working on most of the folders. So now we can use our well-tested procedure of getting the folder name and file ID from the file ID input when we do the upload function and getting the files in our interface. And after that, we are very close to done with the first step of building this application. We only have a few more things left. So I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.